Well, welcome everybody. I am Mordino, and we're doing a deck interview with the illustrious Archangel Aurelia. Do you want to give a quick shout out about yourself here?
Yeah, I am Archangel Aurelia. I'm 22, based out of the Midwest.
What's your home plane? What was the first one you got into?
Zendikar, actually. Oath of the Gatewatch and
Ooh.
Battle for Zendikar was the first block I joined.
That fits real well
Yeah.
with the type of your commander here.
Yeah, no, this deck has a very special place in my heart. Specifically because I went to the pre-release to get like an introduction, and this was the card I pulled.
Oh no shit!
Like, my commander is the card I pulled for it.
Oh, that's cool as hell. Is that print of that card? Is that the card you actually play with as your commander?
Yep. The first card I ever looked at in Magic the Gathering is now the commander for what I would call probably my most powerful deck.
That's
which
awesome.
is also simultaneously the least powerful because it's colorless.
Yep. Yeah. Well, so we're working on this series a bit where I'm just gonna kind of like touch base with a bunch of people, see what kind of decks they enjoy, which ones they're proud of, which ones are their most crackpot. And I thought we were gonna take forever to get to a colorless deck, but turns out our first one is gonna be a colorless deck. So why don't we've alluded to it a little bit, but we just haven't said it out loud. Who is the commander, otherwise known as the Colorless Magician?
It is Kozilek, the Great Distortion. I've called him the Great Disto. I've called him, again, the Colorless Magician, because he, for a colorless creature, does a lot of wacky, wild shit all the time.
Yeah.
Like, if he is on the board, he's not like always a threat. Like, he's not like a mono blue Urza type of threat, but he's definitely something you can't just discount as, oh, okay, he's already on the board, he's already cast, ignore him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you got a 12/12 menace. And I feel like a two-shot commander that's hard to block is something that you really should probably like. Hey, guys, let's deal with this. Can we not let this thing trample over us? It's really funny because we kind of answered a question that I was initially interested in. I was gonna ask why Kozilek of the Eldrazi's, because we've gotten a lot of Eldrazi's like over the years. We just got a whole bunch of new ones in Modern Horizons 3. So I'll reframe my question, because originally I was going to ask, why did you pick this one? And obviously if it's like your first mythic and it was like just this bomb from back in the day. So I'll say this. If you could rip yourself away from your memories and feelings and stuff like that, and you were a brand new Magic player, or if you were just somebody who had never touched base with Eldrazi before, would you still pick the Great Distortion for the version of this deck that you've built?
Personally, I do believe so, yeah. Because with this deck in particular, like, it was originally like an Eldrazi tribal.
Okay.
But the more I've edited it, the more I've put time into it, it shifted away from Eldrazi tribal. Like, yeah, don't get me wrong, they're still finishers. Like, Annihilator 4 and exiling the top 20 of your deck is an absolute madhouse. Like, that's horrible.
I'm glad you brought it up, because at least the screen that I'm looking at right now, it's got the creatures in like alphabetical order, and Emrakul, It That Betrays, and the Butcher of Truth are all staring at me right now. So
yeah. But I will admit, the deck has definitely shifted more from that Eldrazi tribal, just big stompy, to more of like a very multifaceted deck. This deck is very toolboxy now, almost like Aurelia with the Sunforger type of package, in the sense of my whole deck is a lethal weapon, regardless on whether it's on the field or still in the deck. I can make it a nightmare.
So I've seen builds with this commander being kind of like a control shell. Would you say that's something that like this ends up being, where you're using that like last ability where you discard cards in order to kind of counter other people's things, or is that more of like a back-ended strategy?
I would say that's very more of a back-ended strategy.
Okay.
Like, I'll obviously still employ it. Like, for instance, if you look at the mana curve down at the bottom, it definitely follows the traditional, like, almost bell curve of, like, different lower cost spells being more common. But there still is those like really big haymakers that kind of offsets it entirely.
Yeah. We'll definitely have more to say on the curve later, mainly because I just enjoy the fact that it peaks twice. Okay, so let's get into a little bit the more meat and potatoes of the deck. What would you say is like the overarching strategy for the deck? What's your expectation playing this deck?
Primarily the expectation playing it is, again, probably those like Eldrazi-esque type of win cons. If the Eldrazi for some reason gets countered, be it like creatures can't attack, like if they just straight up cannot do what they need to be doing, then there is backup plans. For instance, there is a couple different ways to generate infinite mana in here.
Is it like a 2-card infinite, or is it like a multi-card infinite type deal?
It's a little bit of both, actually. So the more I've built this deck, the more there is. For instance, there's Basalt Monolith and Rings, of course. Basalt Monolith and Forsaken Monument, just both of those generating infinite colorless.
Right.
A little bit of a 3-card wacky combo is Mystic Forge, Ugin the Ineffable, and Sensei's Divining Top.
Oh, so you can play the top, set the top of the library, draw that card, put the top on top, play it for free, essentially.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a fun little loop right there. It costs a lot to get that kind of a thing on the board, because even just Ugin, like that combo in and of itself is like 11 mana. I've seen some of this deck in action a while back, so I'm not gonna ask the dumb question of like how tight is its ramp, but like what are like some things you hope to have in your opening hand?
Opening hand, I would say, would probably be like 1 or 2 lands actually, and then a serious amount of mana rocks.
Okay.
So for instance, this deck plays kind of with Aurelia. It runs 26 lands in a deck that really doesn't have great land filtering options. So I guess the compensation for it is mana rocks, overwhelmingly so. I have actually piloted this deck and won with it without playing a single land. It is wholly possible and it is wholly achievable. Now, it's not going to happen every time, but that is something that I have been able to do. Lands, funnily enough, are optional for a colorless deck with Eldrazi as the win con. Typically good cards that I would sort of highlight as like, okay, this is a hand I can keep. Obviously, you still have the staples like Ancient Tomb, City of Traders, those lands that like tap for 2.
Yeah, the Soul Ring type lands.
Yeah, Ugin's Labyrinth is a good addition. Urza's Saga is pretty good. Because if you have any mana rocks to follow with it, Urza's Saga can be generating you bodies.
Yeah.
And then, by the end of it all, you can go grab so many different 1-drop artifacts. There's 15 actually possible targets for Urza's Saga.
That's a really serious tutor for like a deck that's not running black to have that much access to their deck.
Yeah.
I realized something that's also kind of funny, and this might just be a weird rules thing. So I'm looking at your lands, and I see Urza's Saga because we're talking about that, but I also see Thespian Stage. And I was like, what if you turned it into an Urza Saga, got it to chapter 2, and then had it become a copy of a different land, and then you could just keep pumping out the constructs?
Yep.
Because it gains that ability. I don't think it overwrites the ability. I could totally be wrong.
I have done that before. I think I had a really strange opening hand where I had like an obscene amount of lands. So like I think I had in my opening hand, it was like Fomori Vault, Thespian Stage, Urza's Saga, Vesuva, the Wastes down there, and then something random like I think it was like Metalwork Colossus and Worn Power Stone, like cards that really don't make sense to keep for an opening hand. But specifically because I saw Urza's Saga, Vesuva, and Thespian Stage, I kept it. I turned the Vesuva as a copy of Urza's Saga to A, generate more constructs, B, go tutor again, and Thespian Stage did it too. So I effectively killed 3 of my 5 lands as soon as possible to go and tutor 3 times.
So since we're talking about the lands a little bit, there's something that like is sticking out to me, and I gotta ask. 1 wastes?
Yep.
Sometimes I'll hear where it's like, oh, like, you know, somebody's running a bunch of wastes because like sometimes those like alternate lands can cost a lot of money and stuff like that. And then I've seen other scenarios where it's like, oh no, I've really like built out this deck and like I just don't have a need for it. Why exactly one wastes?
Environmental sciences. Search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. You gain 2 life. It's a basic land. It does not require a basic land type for environmental sciences.
Oh, that's funny. I guess moving on to something else. And we've talked about a few cards that kind of are like pinpointers for like what kind of game you're walking into with this, or what I should say what everyone else is walking into while facing this. You don't have to like say it in like a number, but to you, like how powerful is this deck to you, and like what tables are you bringing this deck to?
It's I would say like it's definitely concentrated. Like this is definitely a higher power game. I have run over mono green and Golgari elf balls with this deck. It's in like a weird limbo stage between like it's definitely a much more concentrated higher power than casual, and I will never advertise it as anything less. This has fought in some CEDH circles, but holding its own is very, very difficult. If someone plays a collector oof, I'm dead.
Yeah.
In CEDH circles, this has, like, again, attempted. Like, I think the grand total is, like, out of 10 to 12 matches, it's won maybe 1. So I would put maybe at, like, very, very fringe CEDH / extremely high power, not CEDH.
Okay. Somebody just like told me this, and it just lives in my head rent free. They were like, this could be a CDH deck if I go like turn 1, but if I'm turn 4, I'm already lost.
Very
I was
much
like,
so, yeah.
I was like, man, that like hurts so bad because turn 1, you're just like, oh yeah, I can have whatever as long as my game plan's going. If you're like seat 4, you're like, I gotta look for removal spells, or I have to try and skip the line a little bit in order to try and like catch up. So you said collector oof. Is there any other like weaknesses that you've had to like try and overcome, whether you've solved them or not?
Yeah, very much so. Several cards actually come to mind. There's also Stony Silence.
Sure.
Which effectively is just collector oof and white as an enchantment. I've fought against a Memnarch deck, and that thing won using my own cards against me.
Oh yeah, because like stealing spells is always really good if you have to cast a 9-drop and they just cast a 4 or 5-drop and then take your 9-drop.
Yeah, the most interesting part is that Memnarch had counter spells, which this deck does not really have in the traditional sense.
I see you have like a Titan's Presence and
Yeah, there is Titan's Presence in there. 3 mana, exile target creature if its power is less than or equal to the revealed card's power.
Yeah.
And the additional cost is reveal a colorless creature card from your hand. But also, if I reveal Emrakul, Avacyn just gets shafted.
Yeah, you know, I mean, that's how they got rid of her initially, so yeah, it's how it goes. Look, you know, she
true.
All right, so what are your like favorite cards in the deck?
Well, I've actually got a couple of those. So one thing that I've realized that Colorless suffers from exponentially is graveyard recursion and to some degree exile recovery. Like, how do you get that card back that like you desperately need for your game plan, but it just got like exiled off the stack by some discontinuity or something?
Right.
Karn the Great Creator's neg 2, that's actually why he's in here. Well, that and he shafts opponents by telling them, no, you can't use Soul Ring, only me.
You're like, I will be the only artifact player at the table, thank you.
Yeah.
See, I think of Karn as like a high power thing, and usually I stick in like mid to mid high. I have a like a CDH deck that I've been like retooling over the years, but I don't play it all that super often. And I always think of Karn as like a CDH card. But that's kind of neat that you're like, if I have a problem, this is my shovel to get out of said problem.
Yeah, I like Karn a lot, actually. Both the Ugins are in there, obviously, which, for someone who fought the Eldrazi, he actually helps them a lot.
Yeah, who knew Ugin would be the best Eldrazi, like, companion?
So that's why those 3 Planeswalkers are in there. I love them to death. One of my other pet cards is actually Voltaic Construct. And he looks horrible at first, because you're paying 4 mana for a 2/2. that you have to pay mana into to untap a target artifact creature.
Means nothing. That card is so busted.
Yeah, the only issue is Voltaic Construct goes infinite with Metalworker.
Uh-huh.
So Metalworker and Voltaic Construct are just like Gollum buddies.
Yep.
Playing patty cake in the back. And then Kozilek's like, are you guys having fun? Sick. Murder time.
Hey, why not, you know? Yeah,
like if this guy isn't the threat, they go about their thing. Suddenly I play Metalworker and everyone's like, oh.
So we've talked about infinite mana a few times, and I see that you have like a Horizon Stone in here, but like Colorless isn't famous for like hanging on to mana all that well. So, and I saw above on the list that you do have a Walking Ballista, so that's a very like easy lineup. Is there other things you can do with infinite mana? It sounds weird, but like a lot of decks find a much more efficient way to do it. And as I've just scrolled through, I'm like, there's lots of stuff in here, and there's lots of like good, like colorless, like efficient producers. But like outside of like, obviously outside of Walking Ballista, like what are some things you can do with infinite mana in this deck specifically?
Well, infinite mana for outlets, there's actually so much. For instance, there's cards like Manifold Key. For instance, there was a time where Kozilek had already dealt damage to one player, and that player was effectively the arch enemy. Manifold Key with the infinite mana said target creature can't be blocked. 12/12, dead.
So, it's something that I noticed in the deck list too. And I saw this card, and I'm like, this is really funny. Have you ever used Eldritch Immunity?
Yeah, I've used Eldritch Immunity both defensively and offensively. Like, I think it was Kozilek, and I was in the process of equipping Commander's Plate to him.
Yeah.
And someone had cast Unsummon in response because all colors in a... specifically, protection from each color that's not in your commander's color identity.
Well, all colors.
Color identity is colorless. So it's just +3/+3 and all colors.
Yeah.
Like literally building Progenitus over here.
Yep.
And in response, they had cast Unsummon.
Right.
And instead of casting Eldritch Immunity, I was actually able to discard it to Kozilek to counter it, which would have been just the same as if I had cast it.
Oh, that's funny. Oh, that's really funny.
I've also saved them from Blast Act by overloading Eldritch Immunity.
Yeah, Blast Act does the damage, and so it's got a color attached to it. Yeah.
One card that I really, really, really want to point out is Fomori Vault, which is again in the lands.
Okay.
This is a card.
Fomori, that card came out such under the radar. Like, not enough people talked about that card when it got spoiled. Like,
the interesting part is with how it functions with this deck. It says 3, tap, discard a card. Yep. Look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of artifacts you control. Put one of those cards into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. What this tells me is 3, tap, discard a Shuffle Titan. Look at the top X cards of my library, where X is the number of non-land permanents I control.
Essentially.
But my brain says 3 mana, tap, discard a Shuffle Titan, and because the ability goes on the stack, and then the Shuffle Titan is activating as it hits the graveyard, the Shuffle Titan will resolve first, so my graveyard goes back into my library.
So chances are you've played a whole bunch of Mana Rocks, you play Mana Rocks into more Mana Rocks, and then you have no cards in hand, and then you're like, okay, cast Kozilek, refill your hand. You're still getting like a full grip of cards.
Yep, that's pretty much how this deck plays, actually.
Whenever you see a Kozilek deck, just because it has that type line of like you have to discard a card with like mana value, some people try really too hard, or at least in my opinion, they try too hard to like have a really good spread of mana value, so that way they always have something to pitch to try and make them into counter spells. And when you initially sent this list to me, I was like, oh, I wanna see what the spread looks like, and I thought it was really funny because Shuffle Titans end up doing this a lot, where you'll get a normal curve and then it'll spike again. And in this particular instance, yours spikes on 3 like normal, but also has a very healthy like 1 mana and 0 mana spells, but then spikes again on 10. So you get this like really funny like half pint type like skateboard park looking mana curve.
Yeah.
Do you spend some time like trying to like play the game of like which cards to discard and like keeping a spread of like have you ever thought, ooh, I'm running really low on 8 mana spells, I better keep that one in there?
It depends. So typically I don't know, but if I see someone going for a very obvious combo, I think I watched someone tutor for Omniscience, and then they cast Enter the Infinite. And so I know in my brain, okay, the next spell that they're probably going to cast is going to be Omniscience. So that way they can just cast their whole deck for free, effectively.
Right.
Like, they had their whole deck in their hand, and I had an 8-drop in my hand, and I countered the Omniscience using that, because they didn't have anything to stifle the ability of Kozilek.
Yeah, that's the other thing that's really hard about Kozilek is like the counterspell outs are so much harder to do on a card like that.
Oh yeah, because the only way to actually stop Kozilek is with a stifle effect.
Right.
And there's only, I think, 2 cards in the entire game that do that, and that's Stifle or Tail's End. If you do not have one of those 2 cards, you're screwed.
I think it's a Strixhaven one. It's not Whirlwind of Thought.
Because people are, again, still expecting, like, spells to stop their spells.
Yeah, and, like, you think you mostly think you're safe when it comes to, like, oh, I'm running counter spells. Okay, I have some control. And then it's like, no, you don't. You don't. Kozilek is here to stay. Yeah, this one's gonna start bothering me. I just have to find it. Yeah, Whirlwind Denial is one that I played for a little bit. It's kind of like a stack board wipe. For each spell and ability your opponents control, counter it unless they pay 4. It's a 3 mana counter spell. It's a stack board wipe. You're just like, all right, cool. Yeah, I see that you infinitely shot me with all of the this or that. Do you care to pay 4 for all of that? Was there any other big cards that you were like, this is something that like has won me games, or I think this one's funny?
Funnily enough, Clock of Omens, Doubling Cube, and Horizon Stone. Because I think it was like, basically I didn't have infinite mana because this game was particularly interaction heavy.
Right.
So most of my infinite mana outlets, like Metalworker, Voltaic Construct, Basalt Monolith, Forsaken Monument, Rings,
right.
those were all like, okay, no, we'll get rid of those real quick. And Karn had already died. So like, Karn's in the yard. All of these things are in exile. And I'm like, okay, I need to figure something else out because this ain't working.
The house is in shambles. The lawn hasn't been mowed. The dishes are up to the ceiling. The dog is missing.
Yeah.
You're like, I just need a way to get mana.
So what I did was I used Clock of Omens to use my board to untap Doubling Cube repeatedly. And Doubling Cube at the time was making like 1 additional mana because you have to pay 3 to activate it.
Oh god, that's
right.
It.
So you have to have 6 mana in your mana pool to break even.
Yep.
Like, I think I had 7 flat, tapped it, go down to 4, make 8. Then I used Clock of Omens to untap it, tap it again, go down to 5, up to 10. Like, very marginal increases. Because I went from 7 to 8 to 10. Yeah. And I was using so much to get there. But over time, like, I think it was 10, tap it, go down to 7, now it's 14. Tap it, go down to 11, now it's 22. It starts picking up pace really fast.
Yeah.
And Horizon Stone allows me to span it across multiple times to where I don't have to do it all at once.
Right.
Then when you start including things like Manifold Key and Voltaic Key, which can untap artifacts, now we're going faster.
I affectionately call strategies like this Rubik's Cubes, because you're constantly like shifting them from one position to another to another.
Yeah, the best part of all of this is I'm using a literal Rubik's Cube with chains chained down to the planet of Mirrodin.
Yeah, you're like, you will untap and tap for more mana.
Yeah. now I'm playing like the artifact shuffle over here, turning my whole board. Like I had random stuff like Mind's Eye and Nettle Cyst tapping with Clock of Omens to help do this.
Yeah,
like it's the weirdest cards.
So as I've been kind of like passing over the deck list, I do see Mind's Eye, and when I first saw it, I was like, oh, this is really good. As I started optimizing decks, and this is kind of like, oh, I play 3-color decks where it's like, oh, I have access to so many more things because I play multicolor decks. That like Mind's Eye to me nowadays just seems critically bad. Is this something that's stood the test of time, or have you cut it and re-put it back in, or is it just like it's so bad people don't want to remove it and that's why you've drawn 15 cards and are killing everybody?
Yeah, very much like this card hasn't left the deck. I actually splurged and got the masterpiece for it because it's put in such work for me.
Wow. Okay.
Because it's a 5-mana artifact that doesn't do anything by itself, it's one of those cards that people are like, meh, okay, sure, go off. Like, you need it in colorless, I'm not going to take that from you.
Right.
Until people realize I have Horizon Stone out with 37 on it. When they draw for turn, I draw 2. When they draw 3 from Brainstorm and put 2 back, I just draw 3. So it's one of those cards that nobody really pays attention to until they look over because they're about to pass to me, and I've got 27 cards in my hand, and they're like, where the hell did you get all those? And I'm like, oh, you conveniently forgot about the mana pool I have just floating here, and Mind's Eye that says, pay me a singular mana and draw a card. It's like Rhystic Study, except reversed.
Yeah, I just put that thought together. I was like, you know what? This is basically like, because Rhystic Study exists, this one just seems so bad because it's like, oh yeah, I get to draw cards unless they pay for it, but like this is like, oh, you get cards, but if you pay for it, it's like if Smothering Tithe and Rhystic Study had like the worst ever like combination and like backfired on you, but like in this shell.
Oh,
and,
absolutely.
Like, no one is sitting there like, oh, we gotta get rid of it, because then they point to other things, and then it's like, oh yeah, but here's card draw. Off the top of your head, do you know how many like sources of like card advantage you have in here?
There's a decent amount. Kozilek's just always in the command zone, and he will refill your hand back to 7 wherever you're at. That's always solid. Ugin the Ineffable has the +1 manifest ability, which creates creatures for sack fodder. And when those creatures die, the card you manifest goes to your hand. That's an interesting one. Kozilek, Butcher of Truth, of course, with the cast trigger.
I see the One Ring is in here, and I remember when like the buy a box promo was like $35, and I thought that was egregious.
Yeah, not anymore.
Now it's like $70.
Yeah.
But like obviously colorless, you gotta play to your outs, and if it's there, it's there. Well, cool. With that, we're actually all wrapped up on Kozilek the Colorless Magician. I will link a version of this list in the description for everyone to see. It'll be a Moxfield. If you've wanted to build something like this is an amazing shell for it. It is on the pricier side of things, but like if you've ever thought to get into colorless stuff, you kind of already know that it's there. There is obviously like budget versions of this deck and stuff like that out there. So there's a really good small community of people who have like really tuned it. And I love talking about colorless decks because these decks are always beloved by the people that build them. And there's always like funny little cards that make their way, like stuff like Commander's Plate or, you know, Horizon Stone or Mind's Eye that like really makes these decks shine. So thank you so much for your time, Archangel Aurelia. This has been really cool. If anyone else has a deck that they're super interested in, you're more than welcome to leave a comment on here with like your deck ideas, and we're gonna try and get more of this series out in the coming weeks. But beyond that, I appreciate your time and happy hunting out there.